اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. سل إماما عاش في العلم دهورا ودهور، يطلب العلم ببذل حتى ضمته البحور.
سل إماما عاش في العلم دهورا ودهور، يطلب العلم ببذل حتى ضمته البحور.
صابرا في العلم صبرا حتى سموه الصبور،
يخرج العلم بفأل مثل ريحان الزهور.
صابرا في العلم صبرا حتى سموه الصبور، يخرج العلم بفأل مثل ريحان الزهور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. كن إذا سموك اسما لتكن مثل الحضور، كن رفيقا كن عظيما كن كما تلك الصقور. كن إذا سموك اسما لتكن مثل الحضور، كن رفيقا كن عظيما كن كما تلك الصقور. راقيا بالعلم نحو النجم مزدان شكور،
رافضا كل التدني رافضا نفس الغرور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
ابن مسعود فقيه علم أحيا القفور، فإذا أعطاك رأيا كان سهما في النحور. ابن مسعود فقيه علم أحيا القفور، فإذا أعطاك رأيا كان سهما في النحور.
وعلي ثم بالدين معاذ لا يبور، اقرأوا التاريخ تروي عنه أفواه سطور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. إن سألت عن إمام أو فقيه في الأمور، ابن عباس ترنم وسيبقى في الصدور. إن سألت عن إمام أو فقيه في الأمور، ابن عباس ترنم وسيبقى في الصدور. فهو كالشمعة تذهب حتى تأتينا بنور،
ساهر بالليل علم وبأوقات سحور.
اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
إذ بكى النبي يوما سمعا صوتا جهور، يا أبي كم روت عنك الليالي والعصور. إذ بكى النبي يوما سمعا صوتا جهور، يا أبي كم روت عنك الليالي والعصور.
أنتم اليوم كنبت قد علا فوق الجذور، يا أساس الدين يا صرحنا يا صلب الصخور. اطلب العلم أخي فهو درب به نور، به ترقى به تحيا عالما حرا فخور.
الحمد لله رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, and welcome to Islamic Oasis Live. As always, brothers and sisters, and if you have been following Islamic Oasis Live, we are trying and we have tried our best to bring some of the most amazing personalities that subhanAllah, this ummah has produced, whether they are teachers, scholars, activists, journalists, historians, scientists, from different backgrounds, subhanAllah, people who are doing whatever they can to make kalimatullah ila al-ulya, to raise the banner of Islam, the kalima of Tawheed. Brothers and sisters, as you know, in the last you can say maybe 10, 20 years, the effect of secularism, atheism, liberalism, and all of these other isms have had such an direct impact on the minds of not just Muslims, but also humanity in general, where now things that were never questioned before, such as existence of a creator, the need for messengers, the need for guidance. Uh, all of this and everything around it is being questioned. Everything is, to a point that it seems that if you're an intellectual, then you are actually, seems like you're supposed to question it. Not to a point that trying to understand, but to ridicule uh, concepts that are so uh, instinctual as for human beings. So inshallah, to discuss this, we have our brother Sharif Abu Laith. Many of you may not know him. Yeah, he's always he's a known brother to especially people who are engaged in da'wah, calling people to Allah Azza wa Jal. Sharif Abu Laith is a panelist on Thought Adventure podcast. I'm sure many of you follow. An intriguing show which invites speakers to speak on epistemology, theology, and Islam. Their content empowers Muslims with robust understanding of the deen and of Islamic worldview and the clear-headed reasoning which goes alongside its aqidah. We highly recommend our viewers to watch our guest Sharif Abu Laith, even the evidence course, which I have tried to spread around many different groups and especially students, and then in which he demonstrates or deconstructs the structure of contemporary ideologies and concepts such as atheism, scientism, materialism, secularism, and skepticism, in light of an all-encompassing, intellectually rich Islamic worldview. Brother Sharif, welcome to Islamic Oasis.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. How are you doing, akhi? Inshallah khair.
Alhamdulillah, jazakallah khair.
Wallah,
Jazakallah khair for the invite as well.
Wallah, barakallah fiqh for coming, Sheikh, and giving us your time. And inshallah, it will be something that will be on your scales on the day of judgment, because this type of discussions are necessary, especially in this day and time. Sheikh, let me start with a question. What does it mean? What does it actually mean to be an intellectual? And the reason why I'm asking this is because, subhanallah, it seems that to be an intellectual today, which actually means to be confused, to actually not to know, and to not to know the realities of what makes our existence itself. So if you can, Sheikh, let's start there. Who is an intellectual? What is an intellectual?
Well, it's an interesting question to ask, and it reminds me the question of during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where Abu Jahl, before he was known as Abu Jahl, the father of ignorance, he was known as the father of wisdom. Yeah, he was known as an intelligent person, respected. Yeah, he was respected, honored, and yet he rejected the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or belief in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was a mushrik, committed shirk, and he stood as well in the path of the da'wah. And so the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam called him the father of ignorance, instead of the father of wisdom, because that's the reality of it. So obviously, we have our biases as Muslims, meaning we have a particular perspective we look at things. But for us, wisdom, intellect, it comes as a gift, ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to allow us to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not meant to take us away from our belief and our natural state, our fitrah, but rather it's meant to get us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and recognize that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves to be worshipped. So from our perspective, this is an intellectual, and using whether it's dalil evidences from the mind or from the text to come to this conclusion. This is something that obviously we do as human beings and as Muslims specifically, in order to come to the conclusion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. And when doing this in the correct way, then this is the correct use of the mind, and therefore a person would be categorized as being intellectual, certainly from our perspective anyway.
So go ahead. I don't know if you have. Check the reason I'm asking this.
I was just going to mention this point about, you're right, about in terms of this idea of skepticism, which is, I think, the point that you're trying to say, because you'll get people who use very technical language, people who are, very well studied on things, and yet they don't know the basics. They
Mm.
don't know any grounding and foundation. I remember somebody who was doing a PhD in mathematics, and he also wanted to do a PhD in philosophy, and who's bringing up all of these problems regards to the use of logic. So there's different views about logic. One of them is called logical nihilism, which is basically saying there are no logical propositions that can be universalized. And you know, it was a very simple, and he's trying to use this to say, therefore, we can't know that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala exists. We can't really know any of the truths about hereafter, etc. And somebody asked him a question, a very basic question, because he was basically this very highly skeptical individual. They asked him, "Do you believe you exist?" It's a basic question. Do you believe you exist? And he thought about it. He paused. He thought about it, and he goes, "I cannot be certain."
Wow.
So what kind of you know intellectual progress is this, where you're doing PhD in mathematics, PhD in philosophy, and you come to the conclusion that you don't know whether you exist or not, you know. So
That
this is just an example of
that
skepticism.
that that, that brings a lot of questions in my mind now. I mean, a lot of questions. What, yani, but why have people become like this? Why, why is such ignorance uh, spreading like wildfire? I mean, is it that, uh, yani, I guess, go ahead. I mean, I want to know your view in just, we are in two different parts of the world, uh,
Yeah.
and trying to figure out, especially, of course, in the Western part of the world, where people with so many resources available to them, time, resources, wealth, all of this available, and then you find people to be so ignorant that they cannot understand reality the way it should be understood. I mean, a person is telling
Yeah,
you,
so
for instance, he doesn't know if he himself exists.
yeah. So let me I think generally in the West, the idea of skepticism was born out of their rejection of Christianity. I think this is the
Mm,
key issue.
mm,
So you go back a few centuries ago, before the Enlightenment, and you've got a very, the Western European world, and European world generally being very rooted within the belief of Christianity. And because it was rooted in the belief of Christianity, then Christianity was informing them on everything, not just on aspects of belief in God, but how to, function in society. Because this is before secularization, yeah, before they split church and the state. It used to dictate to them what type of views are allowed to be expressed, what views are not allowed to be expressed. Famous examples of like Galileo being censured by the church, by the Catholic Church, because he came to conclusions which they believed went against doctrine. So with the process of skepticism, it was about questioning all the basic foundations that people assume to be true. And so, therefore, they saw it as a virtue to be skeptical over having certainty. They say certainty is dogmatism, it's an irrational idea or irrational belief, whereas skepticism is a virtue because you just don't know. And by saying you don't know, allows you to, ask further questions. But the problem is, and this is the key issue, is people who are skeptical, they tend to be skeptical on certain questions, but in the practical day-to-day living, they're not skeptical.
mm.
Yeah. So, for
So is
example,
that deception?
uh, what's that?
So,
Well, yeah, they're just inconsistent. The hypocrites, basically.
mm,
I give a very basic example. I
mm,
turn around and I say, people are highly skeptical. I say, you're crossing the road. There's a car
mm,
coming towards you.
mm,
Are you going to be skeptical whether it exists or not? Are
mm,
you going to argue whether, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, it can go past straight through you or it could hit you? No, you're going to get out of the way of the car. You're going to make life and death choices based upon what you see, what you understand. You're going to make very serious choices about life. So use the same process when it comes to other questions, like when it comes to questions of belief, as opposed to being these people. And what you tend to find is, you find this a lot, is when it comes to certain questions, they're very like, yeah, we'll follow the evidence. But as soon as you demonstrate how the evidence leads to the belief in a creator, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, suddenly become hyper skeptical about everything. Yeah, question everything. I don't know. Am I sensing reality? Am I in a dream? Am I just hallucinating everything? All of these things come out as responses, as a way to try to you know avoid the conclusion about belief in a creator and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And those are the things that they don't use, that type of skeptical analysis, when it comes to other things in life. And what I try to do is I try to show the disconnect or the inconsistency between how they operate in life and the conclusions that they can make in life, and when it comes to these questions about belief as well.
So, Sheikh, I was watching, I actually went through your whole course. That was, actually, mashallah, tabarakallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, wallahi, ya akhi, use you with your knowledge and benefit the ummah with this. The discussion, for instance, and I want to just stay on this topic on skepticism just for a moment here. When people talk like, is it that they don't understand the difference, or they cannot connect their senses to a reality and hence get to a certainty? Is this a contradiction in them? I mean, is this something they cannot see, that this is the process in order to get somewhere? Or
I honestly think the problem when it comes to the issue of belief in a creator, belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reason why they become highly skeptical about this and they adopt these very weird philosophical positions is more a psychological issue,
Mm,
than a rational intellectual issue. I think there has become for a lot of people in the West, they associate belief in God with Christianity. They see the problems within Christianity, they leave
mm.
Christianity, and because they leave Christianity, they leave all belief in God. They have this notion that, God therefore doesn't exist. If Christianity is false, therefore all religion must be false. There must be no God. So, um, so I think this is the issue, that they have some sort of problem with religion. They have some sort of problem with Christianity. They may have felt that they, weren't treated right, or whatever it was, regards to their particular thing. And so therefore they adopt these highly skeptical positions to avoid the conclusion. Yeah. And I think that's why sometimes rational argumentation gets you a certain way, but unless you deal with the psychology of the person, meaning, his behavior, his emotions, his background, if you don't get into that, then you really won't get change from that person. Because I think the arguments, the evidences, they're obvious, I think, to anyone who looks at, Islam. I think it's not complicated. It can get complicated if people asking complex questions and you have to go into deeper issues. But in origin, it's a very simple thing. It's You ask an average person out there. You say, look, do you think everything around you came from nothing?
Mm.
Do you think that there is no God? And you'll find that the average person will turn around and say, no, when I look around me, there must be somebody that created it. There must be something behind all of this. It's natural and it's intuitive. And so to go away from that natural, intuitive ideas requires people to sort of have a desire, to go against their natural inclinations. And you have to get to that point to make them, get to the heart of the matter in regards to themselves, the psychology, in order for them to start to appreciate the arguments that you're going to present.
Sheikh, why is this, atheism, for instance? Why is it spreading so much? I mean, are we
Well,
saying,
atheism is,
go
yeah.
ahead, go ahead.
No, I was going to say. So I did a talk a few, maybe last year or so, about the issue of atheism, and I looked at some of the data, and what you found was that the atheism is rising in the West. Yeah, it's not really rising as much in the Muslim world or the third world generally. So the most atheistic countries are China, Russia, yeah, and then you have the Western states like America or Britain or some parts of Western Europe. Yeah. Now, why China and Russia? We have rise of atheism is because you have communism.
Mm.
Communist ideology, when it was implemented in Russia, obviously it's not now, but when it was, enforced, state enforced, atheism. Yeah, the idea of communism denies the belief in a creator, and even when they allowed religion, they allowed it in a very strict way. Yeah, certainly in the Muslim regions, they weren't allowed to practice their Islam. Many stories about how in places like Uzbekistan or Tajikistan,
Sure, sure.
there would be police that would patrol during the month of Ramadan in the very early mornings to see if there was any lights on, because if there were lights on, it was assumed that they were doing suhoor.
Mm.
Yeah, i.e. they were fasting Ramadan. So it's very repressed, and it's not surprising then if people are repressed, or they're being forced to adopt communism, that they adopt communism. Same thing we see in China as well, which is a communist or semi-communist state. Now in the West, what you find is that they relegate, so they don't turn around and say you can't believe in God, but what they do is they relegate the importance of the belief in a creator to the margins of life. So for most people, how they operate in their life, whether the decisions that they make, the morality that they adopt, how they interact with people, all of these things are built upon secular foundations, liberalism. It's got nothing to do with God. So as a result, for many people in the West, they see, well, what's the importance of belief in God? Why should I believe in it? So as a result, there's been increase, and I think what I saw was that there was an increase by about over about a 10-year period of I think it was to 22% atheists in America. And the increase actually coincides with the number of people who have left Christianity. So the decrease in Christianity, which was about 15% or something like this, was added to the number of atheists. So you can see less people are adopting Christianity and adopting atheism in that country. Although Christianity in America, as you know better, is still highly practiced in certain states, and still very popular, but it's becoming less. The more secularized the society becomes, the more people live in this type of secular culture, the more you'll find that they'll see the less importance of belief in God. So I would say those are the two main factors. It's state, it's the system, the ideology it's implemented that results. And I think maybe in the last 20 years or so, there's been another phenomena. And I think that phenomena is to do with the war on Islam, yeah,
Mm.
or what they call the war on terror in
9/11, after 9/11.
Afghanistan and then Iraq. And then we saw this what they call new atheist movement. People like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Lawrence Krauss, Dennett, others, who came out and basically, were very vociferous against atheism. I don't know if you want to touch upon that question about the war on terror and how that
I do.
resulted
There's a
in
lot, Sheikh. There's a lot that we need to follow, and I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out how we're going to do this. But especially because I want to talk about secularism, the growth of democracy, for instance, in the Muslim world. Does that,
Yeah.
because how much of uh, look, obviously, if people are secular, there is some type of effect of atheism on their mind, and then for people to adopt secularism, and then from there to push so-called democracy and all of this in the Muslim world, is it too? Yani, is this whole thing is to defeat Islamic ideology as an ideology through thoughts, because they have figured that, look, so far through fighting physically the Muslims, they haven't been able to achieve this.
Okay, yeah. So I think so. There's a few questions regards to
Yes.
that. I think firstly, like I said, is that secularism, it doesn't deny belief in God. It allows people to believe in God, but it just makes it unimportant in people's lives. This is the issue, and so it's not surprising that if it becomes less and less important in people's lives, more and more people are likely to say, "Well, why do I need to believe in God anyway?"
What's the point?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think, yeah. So there's that aspect that results in this, and I think in the Muslim world, why these ideas are being exported is in part, it's been going on for decades in the Muslim world. By the way, it's
Sure.
not like a new thing. These phenomena of secularization. There's been attempts to secularize the Muslim world for a long period of time, and part of the reason is because Muslims have a very, it's a very unique belief system where, it's not amenable to the type of secularization that you see within Christianity. So one of the fundamental doctrines within Christianity is you're not saved by works, you're saved by faith alone. So
Mm.
you don't need to do works. There are no fara'id or haram in origin. It's just simply you acknowledge a belief and it's meant to transform your heart. So obviously Christianity didn't have an economic system or a political system or a social system, didn't tell you how to elect a ruler. There's nothing within their biblical scriptures to explain these things in detail. And so to separate politics and societal affairs when it comes to Christianity is a lot easier, but with Islam it's difficult, or not difficult, is completely different. And the reason why is because Islam has its own unique political system. So it has, Imam Murwadi's Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, or Qadi Abu Ya'la, he wrote a book on Al-Ahkam al-Sultaniyya, the laws of governance. You've got Qadi Abu Yusuf, Kitab al-Kharaj, the book on economics. And then you got, Imam Muhammad al-Shaybani, who wrote a book on expeditions, foreign policy, and warfare. And these are very early scholars of Islam. Qadi Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani, students of Imam Abu Hanifa, and they're writing these books. And they're writing these books because the leader at that time, the Khalifa at that time, is asking them to write these books as well. Yeah, so they want to know the rules. So there's a deep history, tradition within our societies where Islam is not at the margins of society, it's at the central point of our society. That what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says is meant to be the basis of our guidance as an individual and society at large. So coming into that type of land and trying to secularize Muslims is a difficult task. Trying to introduce atheism is a very difficult task. And the reason why is because, again, and this is why, understanding some of the context of how secularism developed in Europe and the West helps us to appreciate, why it's difficult with the Muslim world. When you came, when secularization thinkers and academics and philosophers started questioning Christianity, they started questioning doctrines like the Trinity, saying that it's not
Mm.
rational, it's not logical. Yeah, there's issues because of that. The incarnation of God into the flesh, it's not rational. It's not intuitive. It's not like something that you could come up with, you'd automatically come up with. Whereas if you put a man in a desert, give him no religious belief, it will be intuitive in his mind to believe in a creator and even believe in one creator. Yeah. And so when you have the Islamic doctrine, when it comes to belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's intuitive, it's rational, means we can prove it, but also it's intuitive, means it's part of like the fitrah of a human being, it's part of its innate nature. And so to tell somebody that no, this universe is pure by accident, your life was pure by accident, you have no meaning, you have no purpose, there's no grounding for morality, all of these things just don't make sense, yeah, with something which seems to make more sense where it comes to belief. Yes, there's one creator who created us, who gives us a purpose, gives us a meaning, tells us what morality is, makes us, make this essential, tenet of our life, how we live our lives. And so when, the missionaries, they tried to come with Christianity, it failed. We're now seeing obviously a different type of missionaries with atheist NGO type organizations coming in
Mm.
to the
Mm.
Muslim world, and that seems to be failing. Very few people will adopt it. And so obviously they try to secularize the Muslims in other ways, like for example, the type of dictatorships that we're seeing, or as people are seeing in Saudi Arabia right now, the introduction of concerts, football matches, Ronaldo,
Mm.
boxing, WWE, wrestling, all of these things, they're all done in order to seduce Muslims to adopt secularism. They can't intellectually convince them, so they want to seduce them with these veneers that these are something that we should aspire to. And just maybe more specifically in terms of your question, why are they doing this? I think they do this because they do see Islam as an ideological or a alternative, has a different worldview to secularism, and because of that, they see that as a problem. Especially the fact that Muslims represent 1.8 billion people upon the earth, that they have the most strategic resources in terms of the oil, gas, coal, and other minerals. That the Muslim world, is vast, in terms of where the land area, and also it's in the most strategic areas. All of the waterways, Malacca Straits, then you have the Nile, then you have, through the Somalia and that region. All the waterways and the shipping routes and the air routes have to go through the Muslim land. So the Muslim world is strategically in a very important place and holds a different worldview. Now, obviously, we know that within the Muslim world, they're not implementing Islam and the Sharia 100% because the whole post 1924, the end of the Khilafah, and the imposition through colonialism of various dictators within the Muslim world and the nation states. But there is a deep seated desire within the Muslim world that wants to return back to Islam as a complete way of life.
Sheikh, subhanallah, so secularism, for instance, now in the US here, right? In your let's say in your perspective, is secularism in decline, or is it because and the reason I ask you this is because it seems as time progresses, you're finding that human beings are using their mind less and less. I mean, we have people who don't know if they are if they don't know their gender, they don't know their identity at all. They are trying to be actually animals. We have students now here in high schools where they call themselves what do they call them, fairies or whatever it is that Sheikh, what is the problem of secular? That it creates such level. I don't know to call them human beings. I don't know. They denied themselves that they're no longer human beings. At least some of them.
Yeah, so no, it's a really good question. I think obviously when there are certain like real sort of fundamental philosophical views, intellectual views in regards to things like how do we know truth, how do we know meaning, how do we know purpose, how do we know what a human being is, and within the Islamic paradigm we would say these things are grounded within belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have an unlimited independent creator who created the universe, who created all of existence, all of creation, and grounds things like truth for us, grounds things like morality for us, grounds things like meaning and purpose. So it's not all subjective, it's not all what I think or what he thinks is my purpose, but it's rather grounded in something which we believe to be a real fact about life.
And based on evidence.
That's right. It's based upon evidence. And, it's important because people, I come across atheists and they will say, oh, I have meaning. I have purpose. My meaning is what I want it to be. Yeah. And then they will explain, oh, I want to be well-being and this, that, and the other. And I say to them, this is like somebody who plays with action figures or a dollhouse and says, oh, the meaning and the purpose for these little characters and these dolls is this or is that. Because all you're doing is you're using mind. It's not real. It's not objective. It's not established. It's not grounded on anything. It's just people making their own decisions. And so what secularism does, because it takes away belief in a creator, certain things they're not anchored, like truth. What is truth? Can we know what truth is? Yeah. So therefore you have this postmodernism.
But what if somebody says, I'm sorry, hold on a second. So what if somebody says that, okay, what's the problem with using my mind to realize these things? I mean, what are you using?
Yeah. No, but it's not just using what it is for them. It's when we want to say, for example, we want to say, okay, there are certain real moral facts about the world, certain things which we want to say, this is morally wrong, this is morally right. Yeah. We want to say these things. Yeah. So when we believe that, okay, we shouldn't lie, or we shouldn't backbite, we don't just say, oh, because that's my feeling. We believe, no, we hold on to it because we think this is really morally true. Now, how do we know it's morally true? We believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us guidance and told us what's morally true. So there are real facts we believe that there are real facts about the world. This goes to the fitrah of a human being, the innate nature of a human being, that he seeks to be moral. Yeah. Not he seeks to just think, or imagine or pretend to be moral, believing that there is no morality.
You're saying human being needs that foundation, something to stand on, something to hold on to.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So
So
this is the point. This is the issue. Is that a person wants to be moral, then you ask them what is morality, and they say, "Oh, it's subjective. It's relative." Yeah.
mm,
Or even you'll get some people who will say there is no morality. They are known as moral nihilists. But they'll act as though, and they say, "Oh, we'll just act as though there's morals, but we don't really believe in it." So there is a disconnect between the fitrah of a human being
mm,
and his concepts. Yeah. And this is the problem with regards to the West, that they have detached, because they are saying that human beings are sovereign as opposed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that everything is grounded
mm,
in the human being,
mm,
then
mm,
suddenly what is it that becomes true? Because then everything can be what I want it to be, or I think it should be, and I know I'm limited in my knowledge, so therefore it's me to make up my purpose, and me to make up my morality, it's me to make up what it means to be a human being, it's me to make up what it means to be a particular gender. So the logical entailment, or the entailments of liberalism, results in this what we call nihilism, the destruction of meaning. Yeah. And it's not just destruction of meaning in terms of purpose, but it's a destruction of meaning on number of levels, including what we call epistemic nihilism. So epistemology is this idea of the theory of knowledge, the method of thinking. And epistemic nihilism basically says there's no way of knowing truths. Yeah. There's no way of knowing truths. That all truths are, it's not that there is one which is true and one which is false. It's just all relative, all subjective to whatever an individual thinks could be the case. And also, the other aspect of this, which is specific to secularization and liberalism, is because they say you are the one who makes the decisions, then they say that you have to define for yourself all your ideas. Yeah. And
mm.
this is, they call this over choice, the burden of over choice. It's like, maybe to give an example of this, it's like you go to a phone shop and you've got all these phones, and you've got iPhone, Samsung, other brands, Sony, whatever it is, Nokia, all that. And you've got a limited amount of money and time, but you want to make the best decision. Now, when you've got too much choice, what happens is you don't have the ability or the time or the epistemic knowledge tools, yeah, and the knowledge in order to make the best decision. So it results in a lot of people feeling anxious. Now, if you turn around and you say to a year old or a 6-year old, you said you could be a man, you could be a woman, you could be, in between, there's 50 odd genders. It's you who chooses.
Mm,
Suddenly, a child or a teenager is thinking, hold on, what am I? How do I work this out? Do I have the epistemic tools? Obviously, it's not going to use that language, but do I have the tools, the knowledge to make the best decision? Because if I make the wrong decision, they say I'm not going to live my best life. Yeah, I'm going to live a miserable life. So my best life is for me to make the right decision. They say you have to define everything. How you relate to the opposite gender, how do you relate to your gender, how do you define your gender, how do you, your career, your studies, what you see as success, what you see as meaning, what you see as morality, you have to define it. And so it results in this disintegration, and we see this is why, part of the reasons why we see high levels of mental health
mm,
problems, where
mm.
we have anxiety and depression, because people are lost. And this is why we also see the reaction of the right, people like Jordan Peterson or Ben
I was going to
Shapiro or
ask you
whoever
that.
it is. That's
Uh,
right. They're a reaction to this.
in the last week or so, we have had maybe 3 or 4, at least 3 very nasty shootings in California, right? 11 killed, 14 killed. It's become very common to the point that I think now this type of shooting is only big deal in California. The rest of US doesn't care what the heck is going on in California, right? They're not making it a big deal anymore because it's just, it's going to happen. Okay. So this morning I was looking at uh, uh, an article that was written regarding the shootings in California here, and it said that California has some of the toughest gun laws in the country. Okay, so it's not that the guns are killing people, but then they realize it's the mental problems. Every single person that they looked at, that the one who went and did the killing, they found some type of mental, psychological issues with the person. So, Sheikh, I mean, the West, they boast so much about being able to understand reality and solve problems and develop. They can't figure this much out, that the country is in a mental trauma, or
Yeah,
the
I
West.
agree. I think definitely, and I think this type of it is a mental trauma. This epistemic nihilism, cosmic nihilism, moral nihilism. This idea that we have no meaning, we have no purpose. That the universe is indifferent to our existence. It doesn't matter. It's hostile. We just happen to exist because of an accident. There are no moral truths. We can't know anything. It creates, like you said, anxiety and a mental trauma that is very difficult for a lot of people to go up against. Now, this is where I said about the right. What the right try to do is they try to resist this. They try to say, no, no, there are genders. No, no, there are roles between men and women and things like this. Yeah. But the problem with the right is that they still start from a liberal secular basis. So they are liberals, but what they are failing to do is to acknowledge that what the left is doing is showing the entailments of liberalism. This is what it occurs. If you are
Mm,
sovereign and you define what you want to do about your life, then you should be able to define whether you're, a human or an animal or whatever it is, or man or woman, whatever. Yeah, you have that right. Now, the right are going to turn around and say, no, no, no. There are these things called genders, and there are universal ideas about male and female and how people should interact, and concepts of justice and humanity. But the problem, like I said, is that what the left is doing is saying, okay, this is what liberalism leads to. Yeah. And the right is trying to say, no, 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 we shouldn't do that. But they have no argument,
mm.
because the argument has to be rooted upon something, and the rooting and the building of the argument is going to be an argument say there are truths, there are real meaning and purpose in life, there is real meaning, there is real any understanding of what it means to be human beings. All of this would ultimately go back to believing that there is a independent, unlimited creator who created you and me and everything in creation, because that's the only way you can ground these things. And that's why people like Jordan Peterson, and he talks about religion and Christianity, but he talks about it as though it's like a useful myth. Yeah.
Mm,
So
mm.
it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, it's just useful. Yeah.
I
So
like that.
this is
Useful myth. Mm,
yeah, useful myth. So this is how they approach it. The right wing thinker, or right wing, academic or whatever. I don't want to call him academic because he's very anti-Muslim. Yeah, but anyway, there's a right wing. His name is Douglas Murray, and he's an atheist. Yeah, but he says we need to promote Christianity more within Britain. And you're thinking, why? Because he sees it as a useful myth. It's good for the lay people, the ordinary people, to have these ideas because it gives them morality, it gives them stability. But he doesn't actually believe in it. And this is the problem: is that how can you sell something to people where you're not selling it as true, as real? Yeah,
Let
but
me
just
ask you,
as a good story.
Sheikh, but look, when Lenin, or when the Marxists, when they talked about religion being opium of the masses, right? I mean, is he saying this because he's realizing that, look, the system itself can't provide a solution? So we need, and
So
then
yeah,
there is sickness in the society, obviously, because they're seeing it, right? We're
yeah.
a real intellectual sickness. So, but if the masses continue on this, they're going to question everything. So, is it to, as you said, okay, we gotta somehow uh, seduce the masses and give them a pill called Christianity, because it, I mean, it's just to kind of give them some type of a time. And is it to buy time before the whole thing collapses in every
Yeah.
way?
So I think what it is that you can't. This is the problem. You can't give Christianity to people in a liberal secular society because you've made religion and Christianity the margins of society.
Mm.
Yeah, so
Well,
it's
not only
part of
that, the reason
the
why people came this way was because Christianity was irrational.
yeah, that's right. So the issue would be is I think the trajectory is this is that I think people are seeing more and more of the ridiculousness of these liberal secular ideas, how it's where it's going to, and it's very difficult for people to argue against where it's going to. For example, you get people now who say, "Well, I consider," a white person who says, "Well, I consider myself a black person. I'm trans. I moved race, and I want to
Trans color.
identify as a." Yeah. So, but you know what it is? It sounds ridiculous, but there's no intellectual argument a liberal can give in order to say what he's doing is wrong
Yeah,
or
yeah,
irrational.
yeah.
Because from a liberal perspective, firstly, the idea of race is arbitrary anyway. Secondly, is that a person can just turn around and say, well, it's his choice, he's sovereign. And if you don't have a biological basis to distinguish between one race or another, then it should be the individual that has that choice to do. So, you have these situations where people, come out with statements which on the face of it just seems ridiculous. So, yeah, I think there's going to be. I don't. I think people are rejecting. Have rejected religion as a central premise. Obviously, there are certain areas like in America, etc. But in the UK, it's just there's no religion in the UK anymore. Yeah, except they celebrate Christmas. Even then, when they celebrate Christmas, it's got nothing to do with Christianity. So you have that problem. And now I think there's a growing realization of the fact that there's problems within liberalism itself. Yeah. That like these ideas of, what it means to be a man,
Mm.
masculinity, because then you got these terms like toxic masculinity and you got feminism, etc. And so now I think people are looking for alternatives. And I think this is where when you are able to present Islam not just as an intellectual idea,
Mm.
evidence improves, like I did with the evidence course, but also solutions and how the solutions accord with human fitra within human beings, then I think a lot of people will be attracted by it because you have those both things. It accords to the human nature and also it agrees and it satisfies man's mind as well. Yeah. And I think part of that we've seen was the phenomena of Andrew Tate. I don't know if you heard of him.
Yeah, yeah, of course. The whole.
Okay, I don't know if he's popular in America as well. Yeah.
I mean, he's
So
popular. I mean, the problem, Sheikh, is that people are looking for, uh, you know, it's worshiping personalities, right?
yeah,
And so again, it's there is nothing intellectually there. So
yeah. But it
anybody.
was interesting. But
Mm,
I was going to say what's interesting though in terms of Andrew Tate because obviously he converted to Islam.
mm,
You know, obviously he's new in Islam, so he lacks a lot of knowledge, lacks a lot of understanding what Islam really represents. Yeah, but he converted to Islam. But he converted to Islam because, in part, his rejection of liberalism.
mm.
He realized that the liberal culture has resulted in destruction of families, of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, identity, etc. All of these things. So and there's a phenomena with regards to what we're seeing certainly online in the social media space where there's a lot of very popular YouTubers or social media influencers who are looking into Islam now or inviting people on to talk about Islam. Speaking now, it's sort of seen as actually we used to attack Islam because it had these traditional values that a woman is a housewife and mother. She can work, but his main responsibility is this. The husband is the provider, etc. And gives these traditional values. And they used to say, "Oh, this is oppression upon the woman." You know, now these ideas are seen actually they make sense. Because the alternative is what they've been seeing and experiencing this competition between the genders, and these accusations of toxic masculinity and feminism from both sides. And now they're realizing actually we need to separate and maybe look at the genders within a different paradigm, like within tradition and family, as well as the fact that there is an acknowledgement as well that the population levels, particularly in the West, are declining. Yeah, and they're declining rapidly. Like in
Of course.
Italy, the average age is 45. In Britain's, you know, there is a reduction in within the white non-Muslim indigenous population. Because the liberal secular ideas, they're not conducive to creating families, basically, and human beings want to be part of families. It's part of their fitrah, part of their innate nature. Yeah, so I think there's an acknowledgement now that there is a problem within liberal secular societies, and that just simply being on the right of the liberal spectrum in terms of the ideology liberalism, that's not going to solve the problem. So what you really need is an alternative. And so I don't mean to go on, but what was really interesting is, when the World Cup took place in Qatar, yeah, the football World Cup, and there was a lot of criticism, obviously, in Western media, particularly in the UK, because of the traditional conservative values that Qatar has. Now, obviously, myself as a Muslim, I disagree with Qatar having the World Cup because of different reasons. Yeah,
Mm.
not because of what the
No,
West
I
is
understand.
saying. But what I want to acknowledge is that many non-Muslims who travel to Qatar had a completely different experience to
Mm.
what they were being represented, women and men. Yeah. They were saying, because obviously we know the government's one issue, but the society of the people are a different issue. They still hold on to the traditional Islamic values in many cases. And when people experience the traditional values within that community and society, they were attracted by it. They say, hold on, we don't need to drink alcohol in order to have a good time. Look at the hospitality. Look at how it's safe for people to walk. Yeah. And suddenly people start to see a different alternative to the liberal secular way of life that they've experienced in the West.
So, look, hold on, Sheikh. So here's the thing, and Jazakallah khair for that point. Here, so you said, look, there's anxiety, and then there is versus reality, and then there is something you said like certainty, right? I mean, that they are attracted to certainty.
Yeah.
The human mind, or fine, let's say human mind, it's attracted to certainties, right? I mean, it needs something certain, so it can so you can actually live your life with meaning. So, I mean, expound on that a little bit more, Sheikh. Why is it that human being is attracted to certainty, and what does that have to do with reality?
Well, there's two ways, or a few ways to look at this. The first way would be is to say that we are created with this innate desire, this innate disposition that wants to see certainty. Yeah, wants to believe that there's something real outside of my own mind. Yeah,
Mm.
there's something real out there, independent of me. The second thing is this: is beliefs that we hold are going to shape our behavior. And so the beliefs that we want to adopt need to be beliefs that we believe to be very, assured, yeah, certain. Because if we're going to sacrifice our lives or do certain actions according to these beliefs, then I've got to be certain that these beliefs are correct. And that's not just for a Muslim or religious person, but a secular person, a liberal person. They will have beliefs as well, and they'll undertake actions based upon those beliefs. The problem is when you investigate what's their basis for somebody who's liberal or atheist, what's their basis to determining their certainties by which and their belief systems by which they act by, they don't have any. And so again, I think this is a problem of it creates anxiety within people, creates issues. They, replace, they're looking for something to replace that emptiness or that epistemic gap that they have within their mind, that the lack of certainty that they have. And so, either they become sort of people who don't think and just adopt what's around them, as society says, or they struggle with the doubts and the convictions that they have, and we see problems with nihilistic individuals like these mass shooters exemplify.
So now let's go to the role of the Muslims, Sheikh. Are we answering these questions? Are we are the Muslims, you think, especially the scholars or those who claim to know the deen, are we doing justice to this deen? Are we presenting Islam the
Yeah.
way it should be presented?
So I think it's multifaceted question, because I think when it comes to our tradition and the past with the scholars of Islam, what you found was is that they rose to the various challenges of their day. So, for example, during the time of Sahaba, there was a challenge about how to preserve the Quran, and they rose to that. They developed a very complex, systematic, detailed system to preserve the Quran, both during the time of Abu Bakr radiallahu anh and Uthman radiallahu anhu's time. And then obviously when there was periods of time where the hadith were some people from the later generations started to fabricate hadith. Then you had a very detailed system developed, an intellectual system called isnad and ulum al hadith as well. And similarly, when the Muslims were concerned about the loss of the Arabic language, particularly very early on within the first century of Islam, they'd started developing script, the rasm, with the dotting systems. They started to develop grammar and the grammatical rules, balagha, which is rhetoric. So they went into very details of these things. And then when you had various sects like the Mu'tazila or the Jabriya, etc., then you had Muslim scholars who rose to these types of challenges, and they wrote detailed books and refutations upon these issues. So you find that is what our scholarship is grounded in. Yeah. I think what's happened in the later centuries now, certainly in our time, is that perhaps the scholars are not trained in the same way. And I don't mean this as disrespect, because they are our scholars, and but the institutions themselves. Firstly, for example, let me give an example. The institutions might discuss things like the Mu'tazila, the Jahmiya, but what discussion is that relevant today? Very little discussion is relevant today on these issues, yeah, on these branch theological issues. But do they talk about science and the scientific method and its epistemic limits, what it's useful for, what it's not useful for, the difference between rationality and science, yeah, and things like this, or that fact that rationality is a broader idea of epistemology, and science fits within a branch of it. So I think these issues and the contemporary discussions that are taking place, whether it's liberalism, whether it is LGBTQI, whether it is atheism, these types of modern contentions against Islam, I don't think these are being taught within the curricula, and so therefore the type of scholarship that is being, or the type of students of knowledge, I should say, that are being developed are students of knowledge which are not grounded, being able to address some of these issues. I think it's changing to a certain extent, because many scholars are now addressing some of these issues and recognizing that they have to address things like liberalism, but it needs to be more advanced, in my view. Like what we had in the past with the scholars. Like Imam Ghazali wrote Incoherence of the Philosophers, or Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote a critique of logic, yeah, and the limits of logic, yeah, and things like this. So these were, and what's interesting is that we have a lot of Christian philosophers who are doing a lot of intellectual and academic work on, like, the rational arguments for God, not for Trinity per se, but for God. And many of them are actually using the classical Islamic scholarly works of people like Imam Ghazali, or the general positions of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah on these evidences and arguments. So it's interesting that they're using this and coming up with their developing these arguments further, whereas the Muslims, whose tradition it is, are not at the forefront of these things. And obviously there's many issues regards to why that's the case, and I think a lot of it is because of how we're taught Islam, and also how our societies are run today, and how it doesn't any promote and push Islam as it used to in the past. I don't know
See,
what your thoughts
no,
on this, Sheikh, are, because it's
no, the thing is, I was, look, Sheikh, no matter where I travel, right, I travel to a lot of places, and I visit a lot of madaris and things like this. Uh, the It seems that there is a reason why intellectuals in the Muslim world are in jail. Right? There is a reason why Sayyid Qutb was killed. Abu Ala Maududi was about to be hanged. Taqiyuddin Ibhani rahmatullah alayh was tortured. And so many of the real people who understood a lot of, they understood issues the way they are to be understood. And because of that knowing the haqq put them in the trouble that they got into. So this is the, and then of course this is why, and then unfortunately when you go to the madaris and you talk to the scholars of today, many of them, they just, the idea that we don't want to rock the boat has created such an destructive decline of the Muslim mind that it has, from what I'm understanding, from what I see, is that it has just, thinking has been just removed from the madaris. It's almost a crime if you think outside the box, if you're realizing what's happening to the Muslims, if you're aware, just the only thing, so this is why I'm that's why I'm asking you also, Sheikh, is that, obviously you seem to be a student of knowledge. You obviously are a student of knowledge. Why, subhanAllah, why are you able to understand these things? It's not like you went to a madrasa. It doesn't seem like you went to a madrasa. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah. Well, I went to local madrasa here, isn't it? In terms of what my studying of Quran, the way that the basic
Right.
ones are. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, obviously, I've studied other things as well, alhamdulillah, amongst scholars.
You're a
as well.
pharmacist and things like this. But
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that's academic. Yeah, that's the work. But yeah, so I think
something compelled you to think. Right?
Well, obviously, I was, alhamdulillah,
that doesn't
I was
exist when you go to the
yeah,
madaris. From what I'm understanding.
I was very fortunate that when I was very young, I used to go to circles of knowledge where they used to discuss things like proof of the evidence for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the mu'ajiza of the Quran, that Muslims are the ones who have the deen, which is a complete way of life, and that this deen is built upon a rational foundation, and that we all have a responsibility to establish this civilization. Yeah, not just individually do da'wah, which is very important, but also establish this civilization upon the earth. Yeah, and that this is our, is a mission and responsibility that's given to all Muslims to establish this deen as best as we possibly can, and that obviously, like I said, it's built upon some rational foundation. So I was very young. I remember going to school, debating with my, students and also teachers as well. The same thing happened in college. So alhamdulillah, I was very fortunate that I used to go to a lot of circles and Islamic talks because my brother was older and he used to take me to these talks and Islamic circles of knowledge and things like that. So I was very fortunate in regards to that. And so, but it was not the traditional madrasa approach, which is which is unfortunate, because the traditional madrasa approach was learn Quran, recite it, as try to become fluent, memorize certain surahs, memorize certain adhkar, and that's it basically, without knowing meaning, without knowing understanding. And obviously when I grew up, when I was younger, you're growing up in a society which is secular, and these the mosques and masjids and the madrasas are being run by first generation Muslims who have come from abroad and settled in Britain. And alhamdulillah, they built many mosques, many madrasas. They developed huge things for the Muslim community. So I'm not trying to take away from that, but in terms of the Islamic knowledge and developing critical thinkers and deep thinkers. They didn't have the or addressing some of the contemporary issues that many of the students were facing, or many of the children and kids were facing. They hadn't developed these things, and so it was still rooted in the Indian subcontinent type of approach. So I think that's part of the problem. But I am sensing now many mosques, because obviously now there are second generation, third generation Muslims in the UK who have lived through this environment, that many of the mosques are aware now that they have to address these issues. For example, we, myself and a few brothers in our local area, we developed a curricula for the madrasas to implement on LGBTQI, how to address some of these topics. So,
Mm.
you know, so what we're saying to the mosque is you're spending 5 days teaching 2 hours a day Quran. This is what happens in you. I think, is it the same in America?
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah. So you have that. So half an hour on a Friday or 40 minutes, rather than doing the Quran, take time and start to ask these types of questions, and here's how to address these answers, and make it interactive for the students and for the kids from 13, 14, 15 onwards, or 14, 15, 16, these types of questions, discussion, because the reality is they're going to get these questions anyway. They're getting them at school, by the teachers. They're going to within the media, within the films and the dramas, and any their students and friends. These are the discussions that people have. So we had like one scenario where we said the teacher says that there is nothing wrong in a boy becoming a girl. Yeah, how would you address this? What would you do? And then we let them list out certain questions and topics and address it. So, alhamdulillah, that was
Hold on though. Here's the thing, Sheikh. Look,
what's that? Yeah.
There's a lot of hypocrisy that exists amongst the masajid and amongst the scholars. Okay, and I'm sure I'm going to get heat for this, but for instance, you have, like you said, okay, look, we have to, if the teacher asks the question that, whether somebody is a man or a woman, and you have to be able to answer that properly. Okay, but then on the same masjid might bring someone who's supposed to be a person who's going to run for a leadership position in the community, and then that person will come and stand on the minbar or in front of the Muslims and say, we must support civil rights, we must support this and that. And then you created such confusion between a person who thought he had it right, and then someone comes to the masjid and says, no, we yes, that's true, that's right, but that's what we think is right, doesn't mean everybody has to think that's right.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now you created the same confusion, that why people left Christianity. Nothing is there to hold on to. And that's one phenomenon. Right? The second phenomenon is that you have scholars are teaching something privately. When you ask the scholar, here's the situation, they'll say, yes, Sheikh, yeah, that's true. But then, I can't say that publicly. But, but then what you just spoke to 500 people and you said what you said, and then when I come and ask you privately, you said, yeah, I know, but I was told to say that by the board, I was told to say that by this and that. That's what I'm talking about hypocrisy, Sheikh. How can you create something that the community or our youth can hold on to while you are teaching them how to be hypocrite?
Yeah. So, like I said, I'm not too familiar with the American scenario, but some of the things that you're saying there are very similar to the UK as well, Britain, in terms of how the mosques react in certain situations. But I sense it's getting to the stage now that, because the push for certain ideas is so strong, as particularly in Britain, we have some cities and towns where heavily dense Muslim population. So even though it's a state school in the UK, so it's run by the state, it'll have 80, 90, 95% Muslim students. And those types of schools are being targeted by LGBTQI activists. They're being pushed heavily in these types of schools when they're 90% Muslim. Yeah. In fact, even Islamic schools have to promote, or not promote, but at least teach these types of ideas. Yeah. And sometimes it comes across as promotion as well. Because of this, many of the mosques are now aware. So when we were holding, for example, when we held these like discussions around LGBTQI issues, we had mosques throughout where I live, and the various towns and cities that surround where I live as well, desperate for us to come and discuss with them, and then also with their Jama and their kids as well. So I think there's a growing awareness and acceptance, and I think the more that you talk about these types of issues as well, the more you highlight the issue of liberalism, because I think that's the fundamental Aqidah issue here, which is this idea that human beings are sovereign and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not. Because when you explain this point, then the realization should be is, yeah, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sovereign. If he's sovereign, it means he's sovereign in all aspects of our life, individual and society. Yeah, the ibadah and the politics, he's sovereign. So this now becomes very clear, or starts to develop within the mindset. But I think the other thing is and it's a very difficult shift in mindset that Muslims need to have, is this idea of sacrifice, this idea of struggle. Yeah, this idea that we are here to struggle, not we are here to create and eke out a nice life for us. Yeah, having a mosque and having place where the kids can go to, but it's all within a secular paradigm and you're never going to challenge it. That's the problem. And again, because of the rise of atheism, because of the push of atheism, because of the push of liberalism within the Muslim children now, in the UK, I think a lot of people are realizing that you can't bury your head in the sand. You can't just simply say, I'm happy, I've got my mosque, we do Quran teaching, the Imam, he gives a talk, that's it, bayan, everything's good, because now those contemporary issues are affecting them. Yeah, there's one mosque in Oldham,
chicken coming back,
yeah,
as they say,
yeah,
coming home to roost. So here's
yeah,
the final question,
exactly,
Sheikh.
that's right.
Final question, because I know time. I don't know how old you are, but I saw, for instance, after 9/11, right? 9/11 happened. Before that, there was the Afghan war.
I was at university then.
Oh man, it was the best time to be in the university at that time, because it was, and that's what I'm coming to. Look, I mean, at that time, when 9/11 happened, or before that, it was the Afghan situation going on, or the Bosnian situation going on, and then there was constant
First Gulf War,
right, first Gulf, and then the Iraq situation happened, and then Palestine was a constant issue, Kashmir, this, that, Somalia. I mean, and that kept us, either you have to question, why is this happening to us, right? What's going on? Why are the Muslims constantly being hit? Why are we, how come we are so weak? What, you're questioning all of these things. Why are they attacking me just because I'm calling myself Muslim? Is that, and oh, you're a terrorist, you guys are fundamentalists, you are these are crazy, turban, blah blah, all kinds of. But that kind of force, it pushed us to think harder about what we believe in. But today, the idea that don't rock the boat is creating mindlessness and aimlessness. Is this, do you see a problem here? I mean, I don't know what it is in Britain. At least in the US.
I think,
US people are too comfortable.
Yeah. No, I think obviously there's a whole topic about the migration, the experiences of the immigrants in America compared to the UK. The UK, they wanted working class, uneducated migrants to come
labor.
Here. Labor, they just wanted ordinary people to work in factories. And so many people came from the villages, they weren't educated, but they were traditional. They had traditional conservative values, and
Mm.
because they had to live in difficulty in terms of poorer housing, poor neighborhoods, all these things, it created, especially within the second generation, a conflict in their mind. It wasn't we're comfortable. It was how do we navigate in this situation? Yeah. And so many Muslims, certainly in the second generation, like you said, because the Iraq War and all these types of triggers, as well as the racism and the poverty and the poor schooling that they also faced, resulted in them making saying the choice. Actually, what am I? What's my identity? Am I Asian? Am I British? Am I Muslim? And so many became returned back to Islam in a stronger way, and that's why we saw a very strong thing because the rise of sort of Islam within in UK. I think in America it's slightly different. You had more professionals who moved
Mm.
there, and they had a better lifestyle, better neighborhoods that we're coming into. So it's a bit of a different scenario. But what I would say is this: is that post 9/11, and this is where my concern is in terms of the Muslim community, is the way that the government has silenced many aspects of Muslims in
Mm.
terms of being able to talk about certain political issues has resulted in a generation of Muslims who are completely unaware
Yes.
of some of the political
Yes.
concepts of Islam because so many people are scared to talk about it. We have now many, we used to have talks and circles taking place across the country. Now you just have charity events
Yes.
and you have
Yeah.
nasheed artists with
Yes.
them. And
Yes.
maybe somebody might come and give like a little motivational speech. That's it.
Mm.
Whereas before, you had people who wanted to give a message and people wanted to attend because they wanted to hear the message.
Akhi, now
But
we have
now it's
schools
just,
here. We have schools, madaris here. Huge, grand, mega masajid, mega madaris. What they are producing is nothing but fundraisers. What they
yeah,
are good at is that how to raise funds, and this is it. This is Islam. And
yeah,
if I give $10, I did my work. Why is this happening in Afghanistan? Why are people suffering? Why are people Palestine today? As you know, what's happening in Jenin as we
yeah.
speak. Last 2 days in the drone attack by the Americans in Somalia and the situation. I've had close friend of mine was actually killed in the attack yesterday. 2 days ago. Because I do a lot of this work over there, Sheikh, and he was very close. SubhanAllah, the brother was blown up in pieces, and his son. And so, and we see the brothers we're working with in Syria. We're constantly seeing the brothers in Afghanistan, what's happening, suffering, people dying, freezing to death, millions of Muslims in tents, camps. None of this actually matters to the youth here at all. None of this matters. And when you discuss that, you will actually have youth and say, well, look, man, we're American, we're here. Why do we have to always think about what's happening there? Did we, are we even teaching Aqidah properly to our youth?
Yeah. Well,
I promise this was the last question.
No, it's fine. Yeah, fine. I think what I would say is this: is you have in the Muslim community, you have what they call stakeholders, people who have mosques, run madrasas, run Islamic schools. They're stakeholders, and because these stakeholders are worried, because the governments have been very strict on them, saying we'll close you down, we'll do this, we'll do that, that they're unwilling to sacrifice because they're scared of losing the institutions. What we're seeing in terms of the Muslim youth as a result is there are many Muslim youth now that I come across who are becoming more intellectually aware of certain aspects of Islam, like some of the intellectual proofs, criticisms against liberalism. But where the gap is the political discourse within the Muslim community.
Where do we go from here?
Unfortunately, yeah, that's the problem. Yeah, so I think what it is that you can have, for example, I come across some Muslims who are very critical of liberalism, but then don't have any discussion about Khilafah, and I'm thinking, well, the entailments of criticizing liberalism, saying that Islam or God or religion should not interfere in politics. The criticism of that is religion should be the basis of politics.
Yes,
And
but
it should
that
be
intellectual awareness is not there, Sheikh. So they're discussing branches, but they won't discuss the roots. I mean, they'll want to talk about Islam, but they will say, let's not bring Islam, but let's just talk about Islam.
Yeah. So I think what it is that wider political awareness is not there, and I think because of that, the general type of approach that many people have is a very sort of individualistic approach, including the dawah, including people who do dawah. That their dawah is like, and I'm not criticizing it because I've done it myself. Dawah stalls where they're inviting non-Muslims to Islam, which is a great thing, but it's more than that. That's the thing. The dawah is more than that. Dawah is meant to establish a civilization. If you're criticizing liberalism and capitalism, it means you have an alternative to liberalism and capitalism. If you're criticizing the way this society is functioning in terms of gender identity and not knowing what a human being is, it means you have a completely different worldview and how society should be established. And that point needs to come out more because, but I think part of the reason why people don't want to
Sheikh, look,
talk about that. Yeah.
if you have scholars who are defending the rulers of today, and then they have
I was
these
going to say
stalls,
this is part
and
of
they
the
have
reason
dawah
why
tables,
they don't talk about
and they have this nonsense that they think they're doing something with, right? I mean, whoever
Yeah.
wants to come at it. I'm sitting right here. But anyway, here's the thing: you do all of this, and then you go and you defend the rulers who are killing Muslims. Then you go out there and defend, and say, oh, we cannot criticize kufr and cannot talk about removing kufr and cannot talk about removing the oppression and colonialism from the Muslim lands. What dawah is this, Sheikh?
Yeah, it's problematic, I think, and obviously, we don't make mass takfir of the rulers. This is not the discussion here.
Yeah, of course.
But the issue is that, the rulers are part of the root problems that are facing the Muslim world. And what's interesting is this, and I've discussed with many Muslims and non-Muslims. I've even discussed with people who've left Islam, face to face. And part of the reason why they leave Islam and part of the reason why non-Muslims have a negative view about Islam is they say, look at the Muslim world.
Mm.
If you're saying Islam is the perfect religion, the guidance from God, why your country's messed up?
Yeah.
Now, if I respond and I say it's because don't judge Islam by the Muslims, judge it by Islam itself, then that is a failure. That's wrong, because what does that mean? That means that Islam was not able to raise Muslims. So what it is that you have to have a narrative, an explanation as to why the Muslim world is in the state that it is. Yeah. And the narrative cannot be it's because of Islam, because that's the narrative of, the West and Orientalists saying that Islam's holding Muslims backwards, holding them back, causing these issues, causing these fitna, etc., civil wars, fighting, instability. So we have to have a narrative, and the narrative has to be is that actually it's because our societies have left Islam, in particular the political aspects. And then that means talking about the rulers. Now, whether you want to say they're Muslim, Kafir, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. That's not an issue. But the issue is the fact that these are societies not functioning according to the guidance of Islam. They are post-colonial entities created by the Western European powers, and supported now by countries like America, some of these dictatorships. And because of that, we are seeing the secularization and the instability and the problems and the wars and the civil wars, etc., and corruption within our lands. So this is the problem. It's not because from within the Muslims themselves, they created the chaos in the Muslim world. Rather, it's something that's inherited from colonialism. Pakistan is a good example of this. Many of the, the political class are from the land owning class. These landowners, they got their land primarily because they served the British Empire. And because they served the British Empire, they were given vast amounts of land. This meant now that many of the poor people who lived on this land were basically bondsmen to the landlord, to the zamindar, as they say. Yeah. And so as a result, if the zamindar says, right, I want to become member of the National Assembly, I want you all to vote for me, who out of them is not going to vote for him? It's got nothing to do with politics.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with he believes he's the right person. It's because if they don't vote for him, they could be kicked off the land.
And they say slavery doesn't exist.
Exactly. And so this is and then you can talk about the military, what they call it a millibus, which is basically a military type of dictatorship that you see within Pakistan, or we see within Egypt, and other countries in the Muslim world. So the point being is that you have to have a narrative. And when I explain this to Muslims who have left Islam, or when I explain this to non-Muslims, they start to understand and appreciate the problem, and appreciate that actually don't judge Islam by the Muslim world now, because you're looking at secularized Muslim world, not an Islamic Muslim world. Yeah. So you have to have this narrative. It's really important. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate this. And like you said, they're worried because as soon as you have that narrative about the Muslim world, you're going to have to speak out against the rulers. You're going to have to criticize them. And many of them say, told, no, you can't do that. It's haram. It's you're deviant, mubtadi. You're going to become one of the Khawarij and all this type of absolute nonsense that's being mentioned. And I think, maybe side point, but I think we're seeing this in Saudi Arabia, where Saudi Arabia is becoming more and more liberalized. And the voices in saying we cannot criticize leaders like Saudi Arabia are becoming more and more louder. Why is that? It's because they're like they have to maintain the thrones of these rulers have to maintain their thrones, so they're basically pushing this narrative out, and now it's getting to the stage where they're holding Halloween parties in the streets of Saudi. Brothers, I've known two brothers independently, don't know each other, independently told me there were non-Muslims in Mecca without hijab.
Yeah.
One said there was nobody that they don't wear hijab, or they don't as in mask, but there are women, Muslim women in near the haram, around the haram, who are not wearing hijab, and it's normal. It's become normalized in that. Yeah. Whereas when I went to Hajj, over 10 years ago, everybody is wearing hijab. All Muslim women. It would not be even conceivable. So you're having these type of situations. In fact, like I said, one person, he told me there's a non-Muslim who is a tourist there in the Haram, and that's shocking that it's becoming like this now. Yeah, so we're getting to a stage now where it's untenable in defending Saudi Arabia and its leadership.
It's just that we just have to stop defending kufr, Sheikh. Period. Yani, subhanallah, we need to now. As we said, as the title goes, brothers and sisters, it says beyond blind faith. And we can no longer accept things blindly. We need to study our deen. And our deen pushes us to understand things properly, intellectually, and challenge the world with it. This is what Islam came for. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. It didn't just come for Asians or Arabs or this. No, for the whole alamin, for whole alam. And we need to, we have a responsibility in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. Will be held accountable for not presenting Islam. We are going to die, brothers and sisters. And if we don't do what we do, Allah will replace us with those who will defend this deen, who will bring this deen. We need to realize that we will be accountable for what we are saying, what we are doing, and there is a day of judgment. Brother Sharif, Allah Jazakallah khair for your time, akhi. Inshallah Rabbul Alameen will continue to have these conversations because I think it is part of the da'wah work to raise the intellectual discussion in our community and in the world by having this type of discussion. That alhamdulillah the Muslims are seeing and we can see things through and see the realities of corruption that we're being fed and our children are being fed, and hence we are seeing the results of that also. It's not that we're not seeing the results of, we're seeing a whole generation that is confused, has no aims, has no objectives, and has become a danger to even a fellow human being, as we're seeing in California and other places. And with that, brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khairan for attending this talk. Inshallah, we will have another same type of discussion next Friday, bi'iznillahi ta'ala, live. Once again, Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
لا لن يطول الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل همام نحن فينا عمر لا 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 لن يطول الظلام الظلام ديننا لن يضام نحن جيل همام نحن فينا عمر
صبح بدا نور ظهر نجم وشمس وقمر ألقى على الدنيا الدرر هذا عمر هذا عمر كل البرايا تنتظر أيامه البيض الغرر كي تستفيد من العبر هذا عمر هذا عمر
لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح نحن فينا عمر لا لن تدوم الجراح بل سيأتي الصباح نحن أهل الكفاح